What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here today, and we're doing a Seven Seas Breakride Premium deck profile today. So this deck profile is actually going to utilize our Premium Collection Stripe Bad Bounty with the Breakride version of Night Mist. So let's dive right into it. On to the grade 3s. So before I actually dive into the grade 3s, one thing that I want to highlight is actually Bad Bounty on what he does. So for those that don't know, basically this stride from Premium Collection, at the end of the battle when it attacks, you can counterblast 1, discard 3 cards, put this card back into the G zone face up, and write up to 1 grade 3 card from your drop zone as stand. And so really what it enables us as Granblue to have a restanding Vanguard, in a sense, basically. It replaces itself with the grade 3 that you have, and if you have a Protect grade 3, basically, you'll get a Protect gift as well, since you are writing it. And because you will be doing Twin Drive and the additional Protect gift, you will be able to break even because you discard 3, right? And so it's a great start. It's a great stride, phenomenal and everything. But what makes this deck so unique is really the Lord of the Seven Seas Night Mist Breakride. So as you can see, this is the old one. This is not the Vieira retrain. I just want to make that clear. And for those that don't know, the Breakride, basically, Limit Break 4, when you write another card on top of it, that unit gets 10k, and you're able to call 2 rear guards for free, and they get additional 5k as well. And then the end of the turn, they die. And so really what that does is that basically it enables us to call rear guards without using Counterblast, without Soul Blast, or any other resources besides just rewriting, essentially. And so before, we would normally break right during our right phase, and then stride. And because part of that is because we just wanted the revival of the rear guards there, and then our stride can do anything else. So solid strides to go about that was like maybe Negrosanger to push more attacks, and maybe you'll filling up the board more easily with Obadiah or Gash, for example. But with this, you're able to break right more than once in one turn, because you're able to break right during the right phase, and you're able to break right during the battle phase. And that's the second part as well. You're able to break right in the battle phase. And so that means you're calling rear guards during your battle phase, which means more attacks. So it's awesome. And so what are some key cards that you want to revive? And so that's where our Skull Dragons come into play. And that's why we also play 4/4. Is that way, Skull Dragon, for those that don't know, it gets additional 2k for every card in your drop zone. That is also a Vanguard Circle skill. Now, why is that unique? So what happens is that you're able to do a Pseudo Megiddo Turn. This is something that I explained already on Rogue of the Seven Seas blog. But for those that don't know, with the Megiddo Turn, Megiddo is the ultimate stride for Granblue, Aquaforce, and Bermuda Triangle. And so we're able to call 4 Skull Dragons and a Nightstorm. And Nightstorm, what he does, GB1, at the end of the battle, this unit attacks a Vanguard, you can counterblast 1 and call something not itself, as long as it's hollowed as well. It extends you another attack. It's our attack extender, right? And so basically, you can extend another Skull Dragon because it kills itself by its own skill. It self-retires. And so as a result, on a normal Megiddo turn, you're able to get basically 5 Skull Dragon attacks with a Nightstorm poke and the Megiddo Vanguard attack, basically. But it costs 2 Counterblasts plus an additional one from Nightstorm, which is 3 Counterblasts. So 2 to 3 Counterblasts, depending if you're using the Nightstorm or not. But you're getting 4 to 5 Skull Dragon attacks, basically. The Pseudo Megiddo Turn is utilizing Night Mist to bring back those guys back. So during your main phase, you bring back Skull Dragons, 2 of them, and then basically you attack with them first. Then your Bad Bounty strike and attack. Then you do the skill to rewrite and break right. And if you want, you can use a 3rd Skull Dragon to break right on top of it. Then bringing back the 2 Skull Dragons that you previously used that same turn. And now you have a front row of Skull Dragons. And because the power-up skill is also Vanguard Circle, your Vanguard is huge. it's pretty vital. I mean, you only have Twin Drive, but if you're already big, it's going to be hard for them to guard as well. So it kind of makes up for that. And not only that, you basically have 5 Skull Dragon attacks with just 1 Counterblast just by using the Break Ride, basically. And there's multiple ways to bring back Skull Dragon during the main phase with cards like Columbard and Negrabone, but I'll dive into that a little bit. But point is, the deck is able to utilize the Break Ride component and really just push early aggro as much as possible. And the rest of the deck is kind of geared to push that and also accomplish that as soon as possible. And the last grade 3 I like to highlight is really the tech, which is Night Rose V in this case. This was actually the original Night Rose from the Tri deck at first, because the skill that it provided is that with this one, basically it has 2 skills. When your rear guard attacks or boosts, they get 5k. and at the end of the battle, they retire. So enable self-retire so you can actually reuse those rearguards during the same battle phase. And it's key because when it attacks, you can counterblast 1, choose a column, call up to 2 cards from your drop zone into the rearguard column, and basically if your opponent's grade 3 is greater, which it will be if you do this combo, it gets an additional 10k. So basically you're calling rearguards to the field, your Vanguard is at least 22k on its own, and that doesn't count if a booster, if you gave triggers to boosters and all that kind of stuff from the bad bounty drive checks. It really does a powerhouse turn and extend further attacks at that point. So that's why we play a 1 Night Rose V as attack. With the original Night Rose, you can use basically the combination of Skull Dragon because of the GB2 skill, where it sees something retire from Rearguard Circle. You can mill 3 and revive it, thus creating another attack with the GB2 skill of Night Rose, bringing back a Skull Dragon for just milling 3, so it doesn't cause a counterblast or soul blast. So that's the other option too. And they both work well, but I think the new Night Rose is worth trying out more, and it brings a lot more to the table as well. So that's the premise of the deck, the main core of it, and then the grade 2s, the grade 1s, and the trigger lineups and the strides help with that as well. So let's start going into those. Onto the grade 2s. We are playing 10 grade 2s. We had to make room for the grade 3s and for the grade 1s, so we're kind of playing with 10 grade 2s at this level. But honestly, with Granblue, especially with the release of Columbar V, I'm using proxies because it's not out in the English, so just so you know, if you guys are curious. Thanks again to Top Deck Heroes too for providing proxies. It's really useful. Check out their channel as well. Shout out to them. But point is, Columbard and Greed Shade are pretty much the core for any grade 2 lineup for mostly every Granblue variant, to be honest. The reason is because Greed Shade is very consistent in helping the deck as a whole because of its second skill basically. When you place it onto a rearguard circle, you can discard a card, mill 2 cards from the top of your deck, and grab a card from hand that is not himself and put it back to your hand. So it enables any card to go back into your hand, which you can get shield value, combo pieces, you can discard pieces like a Ghost Ship, a Skull Dragon, or any other cards. It really just helps with the consistency. And the first skill is basically if your drop zone has 10 or more cards, this gets plus 5k during your turn on Vanguard or Rearguard Circle. So it becomes a 14k beater on its own, which can actually hit over the 10k grade 2s like Force has, or even poke for Vanguard, especially if you're going against just like 13k, 12k Vanguards basically. So it helps with that too. Now, Columbard is phenomenal. Honestly, probably the best card of the set. So basically, Vanguard Circle or Rearguard Circle, when placed, you can counterblast 1, search your deck up to 1 card, put it into your drop zone, shuffle your deck. Then you can call up to 1 card from your drop zone and call it a Rearguard. This doesn't force you to call the same card that you just fetched. So it gives you flexibility and further setup that you want to push more. And I'll go a little bit with the grade 1s, how that looks like too as well. The other thing that you need to know, it has a restriction. It has this ability may be only used by this card with the same card name once per turn. And so what that means is basically it's a hard once per turn. And so if you use this skill in general, you cannot use it at all for the rest of the turn. Even if you use a second copy or a third copy of Columbard or reuse it because of self-retire, you cannot use it more than once. That's really what it says. So you have to rely on different cards to continue on if you are dependent on basically calling stuff from the drop zone at that point. Now onto basically the text that kind of help with it. King Serpent and Ghost Ship. Ghost Ship, like I said, you could discard it because it cannot be called normally from hand or to Guardian Circle. So you can write it or discard it or mill it with Columbard. A common play, honestly, it's probably one of the newest go-to plays for Granblue is basically if you write Columbard, you can fetch and revive the Ghost Ship. That gives you a 24k beater because his skill gives 15k until the end of the battle when it attacks, and then at the end of the battle you draw a card and retire it. And it enables you to have a beater, so if they got a damage trigger checked by a Columbard attack from the Vanguard, then this can still hit. And on top of that, it'll give you a card, so you gain an advantage, and it removes itself to prevent the opponent basically attacking it to damage deny you. At the same time, it sets back itself into the drop zone for reusability for the next turn, especially once you start striding and start using Breakride and Night Rose and all that kind of stuff. So it synergizes really well with the deck overall. And then the other card right here is King Serpent. When it's placed onto a Rearguard Circle from the drop zone, you can soul charge and counter charge. So it's really the on-demand counter charger of the deck. You will see that I will also be playing the Dancing Cutlass that also counter charges. But this guy can be on demand during the battle phase as well. So if you need to extend more attacks, like an extra poke, he is your man. If you are basically with no counterblast, you can Breakride bring back the Keen Serpent, give it +5 because of the Breakride skill, so it becomes a 13k attacker. Or even with the Vodaya, it becomes a 13k attacker as well. And you countercharge to either basically give you Counterblast to work with, or refund an Obadiah field call, basically. And then that allows you to extend attacks with Nightstorm into Columbard and so, basically. So it's a really nice on-demand countercharger. You could also fetch it in the early game with Columbard. So if it makes more sense to get King Serpent over Ghost Ship, depending on the matchup or situation, then you could just grab it, refund the Counterblast, and then you have an intercept that point. And it's an 8k, so if you went first, you're a grade 2, your opponent's a grade 1, it can probably still hit that Vanguard, basically. So yeah. On to the grade 1s. We're playing 13 grade 1s. As you can see, it's a heavier count. Again, we're playing 10 grade 2s, 10 grade 3s, so there's only so much room for the grade 1s. But honestly, there's a lot of utility in this lineup as well. And so I think where I'll start out with the Skeleton Sea Navigator over here. So it's one of the new cards from the new set. It's a very simple effect, but it's very appreciated. So basically, Regard Circle, rest 2 of your Regards, and put 5 cards from the top of your deck and put into your drop zone. So you mill 5 cards right off the back. It can choose itself too, so you can just call itself and another Regard and then rest them, and boom, mill 5. It's a grade 1, so you can call it as soon as you write to grade 1. So right at your turn 1 basically, you can start using it. And then when you write to grade 2, you can use it again. So then you have 10 cards, and then when you get to your grade 3 or Stride, you can have up to 15 cards guaranteed no matter what. And so it's really good because you want to excessively have that drop zone set up, but not only for key pieces that other pieces can just grab from that, but also for the high count for Skull Dragon. So that way, that pseudo Skull Dragon attack basically is very effective at that point, and it puts your opponent at the kill zone range, and it just makes the deck really just be in the promised land, basically. Generally, 2 to 3 mills is you're pretty much good enough. If you only resolve 1 or none, Obadiah can actually save you. I'll go into Obadiah later on. But with the follow-up with that, we are playing 4 Dancing Cutlass. Now, since we're in Premium, we have access to the OG Cutlass. What he does is when he's placed onto a Rearguard Circle, you can Soul Blast 2 and draw a card. And so really what it does, it forces out the cards that you rode with or Soul Charge with. We are playing the Rough Seas Banshee from the original. Those cards can go into Soul, and you can Soul Blast them for later reuse, basically. And in Big Sim, because you're also drawing, it's an additional card that you dig deeper into your deck. So you're building up that drop zone more easily, and at the same time, it's a body. And what I realized too, with playing with the Dancing Cutlass, that I can draw a card back, so it refunds itself, and then if you have the Navigator, you can rest them both. And so it's like, wow, this is actually really nice because it's a 5k booster. In most cases, it's nice to have, but it's not like essential where you have like an 8k booster, but it's something that it's basically a body that you can use to rest with Navigator and still maintain advantage, basically, and then build up from there with other cards like Ghost Ship and Columbard, basically. Now, why am I playing the V-Series Cutlass at 1 over here? I wanted another form of countercharging, but I didn't want to use Grenache. And so I know I have King Serpent, but I wanted something else that kind of just did its own thing, and that's what Cutlass does. And so what I really want to appreciate is Ian from the original CVC TV channel. Now it's Silent Artist. He is a Granblue player, and honestly, he's well respected. He is the Seven Seas player that I definitely go to, and he always loves the Cutlass engine, per se. And so that's really a shout out to him, and in realizing that you can just basically use these as the cost for this guy. And so for those that don't know what V Cutlass does, is that basically you combine another Dancing Cutlass from your drop zone, and then mill a card from your deck, and then you can call this card to rearguard and countercharge. So basically, you can use these old ones as part of the cost. If this goes into the graveyard, which is easily, or I should say drop zone, this is not Yu-Gi-Oh! It's Vanguard. You can basically get into the graveyard, or see, I did it again, to the drop zone by Nyros' skill or some other methods, or if it got called over and such. It's really easy to get it in the drop zone, basically, is what I'm saying, and just keep reusing by banishing or binding these guys, basically. There I go again with Yu-Gi-Oh! But point is, it's a body, and that main phase setup is key too, with this deck too, so that way your Breakride during the battle phase is really effective, so that way your attacks, your first pokes are bigger pokes at that point. You can hit Vanguard and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just really nice as well. The other things are the other grade ones. So there are different ratios. So with Breakride, Limit Break 4 is basically only active when you have 4 damage or more. So if you heal on your bad bounty attack and you go to 3, you cannot Breakride. It is the crappiest feeling that you can ever have during that turn because it makes your turn lackluster, and if you attacked with Skull Dragons first, you have nothing to really follow up with besides the second Vanguard attack, and then you waste your triggers from that attack as well. So 5 drive checks kind of wasted, and Breakride is off, and it's just horrible. So Brutal Shade is where it comes. And again, shout out to Ian for reminding me about Brutal Shade. Is basically he enables Lemon Break 4 even if you have 3 or less damage. So it's very essential. So if you are doing the Breakride turn, I recommend putting him in the field. You never know if you are at 4 damage and you heal, and you never know if you're at 5 damage and you heal twice and you go back to 3. So that is a thing. And then at the same time, if you're at low damage, just depending on the game state, you have access to that playstyle, so you force it out of them. So that way you can still do that Pseudo Megiddo Turn as soon as possible as you can, basically. The Negerbone and the Tommy the Ghosty brothers. So they're both the retrains from the new sets. Negerbone is phenomenal, and I realized that he actually plays a lot with this deck too, and it's basically because it's a drop zone effect. Discard a card from your hand and put this into the bottom of your deck. You can call grade 1 from your drop zone to regard. And if you have 10 or more cards in the drop zone, you can call any unit regardless of grade. So basically with Navigator and Obadiah, you're able to get your drop zone to that high count where you can start reviving ghost ships, Columbards, Greed Shades, any combo pieces, a Brutal Shade if you really need it, just like that. And so you don't have to depend on break writing on the right phase for Nightmares to bring back a field. Negerbone is there. It literally turns any card from your hand into the key regard that you need from drop zone, which is awesome. On top of that, since it bottom decks itself, it kind of builds a stack and pushes the other cards up higher. So if you start getting to that low count in deck, which you will, there is a higher chance of pushing up those triggers that are still left in deck. Especially if you did an Obadiah where you filtered 5 cards that generally are not triggers at that point. Tommy the Ghosty brothers, Vanguard Regard Circle. It's a permanent 5k boost. Wow, it gets a 5k power up if you have 5 or more cards in the drop zone. For Granblue, it's really easy. In fact, if you do Skeleton Seas Navigator over here, first turn, you're automatically live, which is great. Your Vanguard's a 13k grade 1, which is funny. The second skill is when it's placed, check the top 5 for a grade 3, add it to your hand and discard. So it automatically fills the drop zone for Granblue. You can get your Night Mist, you can get your Skull Dragons, your Night Roses, and your Night Storms. Very good key card to filter. You don't really need it as a high count, but I still wanted to have that, and it's also a 13k booster. So it makes some really nice numbers, especially if you have like a Columbard or any other grade 2. It starts hitting that 22k and up, so it hits like Excel and Protect numbers basically, and then with the additional 5k from like maybe Night Rose or Obadiah, it starts hitting basically 15k, 20k shields out of people's hands at that point, just by that column alone. And so it's really nice as well. It's also Tommy the Ghosty. It's also a Ghosty, but so if you play Negro Lily, but I don't in this build, you can revive it too. So it's a keynote. I forgot to. But it's something that I like to mention too as well. So with that, this is really the support utility with that deck base. And so with drawing, soul blasting, milling, and discarding, and stacking, you're able to accomplish your end goal with the deck at that point. So let's go into the grade zeros. Onto the grade zeros, we were playing the Grenache, which is the on-ride draw 1 card starter, and you get the quick ticket too as well. Honestly, there's no reason to play any other ones except for like Captain Night Kid, and then the other one, the Guiding Zombie. So those cards are more essential, so that way you can draw into the key pieces that you want, especially early on. And it stays in the soul, so it's kind of key for Cutlass, so that helps out. So by the time you write naturally to grade 2, you have 2 cards in the soul that you can just soul blast for Cutlass as well. For the triggers, we are playing 10 crit, 2 draw, and 4 heal. Now, with the draw PGs, I wanted to make more room in the grade 1, so Dolph the Ghosty had to come out, basically. It doesn't really hurt the deck as much. It's kind of nice that it does go off sometimes, especially in the early game. And so one of the key things when you do a Columbard Ghost Ship play, if they attack, they're going to have to attack the Vanguard. And so that gives you another opportunity to damage check a draw trigger. So they can give you an extra card to work with. Or it's just another trigger at that point. Now, what's really nice is that because we are Protect, we're able to generate markers. So that Sentinel, 2 Sentinel like PG-wise doesn't hurt. And so we can rely on the Protect Sentinel, especially if you reride with Skull Dragon or even Night Rose, for example. We're going to get one back, essentially. And then, of course, we have the Critical Sentinel, Rampage. This is nice because it's honestly a 1-card guard for most attacks, especially since a lot of clans are starting to get that multi-attack support from the V-era boosters, basically. And with that, you're able to drop 30k shield, making your Vanguard 41 to 42, depending on what you have as your Vanguard. So it's nice. You can also grab these guys with Greed Shade. So if you mill them, you can just grab them. If you drive check them or damage check them, then you get the benefits of a trigger. So it's really awesome. Just watch out when you have a draw trigger still in the deck, and then you have a low count, and deck out's a thing. So just be cognizant of that, but it's manageable once you're cognizant of that too. And so the rest of the triggers are critical triggers. We are playing the Rough Seas Banshee because it helps building the soul for Cutlass a lot easier. And then there's cards like that can Soul Blast too. And so, especially your G-Guards. So it's just kind of nice just to help build up the soul, draw new cards. Another key thing that I've learned with Rough Seas is that you can call it, rest it with the Navigator, and then put it into soul to draw a card. So it's really nice. So it really makes it like you just call the Navigator and rest it itself to get the mill 5. So that's a really neat trick with Rough Seas Banshee as well. And then the next trigger is the Chat the Ghosty that's in the premium collection. It's basically you're able to pay the cost for Stride. So it saves you the grade 3s in hand that you might need to rewrite for the next turn. So, during the right phase, if you want to break right on top of a break right, or you want to generate another protect marker, because if you ride, you get a protect marker with Skull Dragon or Night Rose. And then if you rewrite one of those in the battle phase with Bat Bounty, you get another protect marker. So you generate 2 Sentinel PG likes, basically, just like that. So that's very key why Chat is very important. And I'm not playing the, I think it's the Wild Seas Banshee, which on attack you soul charge it basically, but it's GB1 lock. The Rough Seas is much quicker, much useful for like Cutlass and stuff early on. So I play that. And so, yeah. Onto the strides. We are playing 11 strides. I am playing 2 Bat Bounty right here. Like I said, it's just a restander enabler for the clan. One of the also useful things that the clan didn't have access to is just a restanding Vanguard. And why is that important is because certain matchups, a good example is Mega Colony, because they have the grade 4 Gridora, which locks you out of Superior Calling from Drop Zone, from even the Guardian Circle G-Zone, so you can't even G-Guard. So cards even like Megiddo, Obadiah, the GBA, Gauche, and Negrosanger, they just become dead. I'm going to be honest. So just having to be able to restand a Vanguard is really cool against that matchup as well. If Chaos is a thing too, that's also that. So that way you can keep a relatively clean board, or if you get your front row locked up, then you can still have a restanding Vanguard turn. So it really helps with that. But ultimately, most of the legit, if you can first stride this or second stride this as a finishing for like the break right combo, then it's really strong at that point. So it's really cool. So now we have the Obadiah. Of course, Obadiah is our awesome premium collection stride from the prior one. Counterblast 1, turn any card face up in the G zone, search up to 5, mill them to the drop zone from your deck, and then call up to 2 cards, 2 Rearguard Circle for each face up card in the G zone, and they get plus 5k. So basically, if it's your first stride, you can call 2. If you G guard and you go into this, you can call 4. After that, you get 5. So it's a full field border. They get power. So it makes numbers with certain cards. And then if you pair it up with like a King Serpent, becomes a 13k hitter, and you refund the counterblast, and you can keep on going to extend more attacks with Night Storm and Columbard and so on. The GBA is still phenomenal. It's free. So one place, you GBA, choose up to 5 cards, call them to Rearguard Circle, and they get 10k until the end of the turn, and they die. So very solid, free skill to call. Negrosanger is there as a placeholder, to be honest. You can play Breeze, Cyclone, or any other cards. But basically, on attack at the end of the battle, you can counterblast, discard, call any card from the drop zone, call it a Rearguard, and it gets plus 5 for every face-up card in the G zone. And then, of course, your Megiddo and your Ballerina. Megiddo is the original Megiddo, so counterblast 2, when you ultimate stride, you can call up to 5 Rearguards from hand and or graveyard, and basically just they get plus 5 in the swap ability. So that's how you get those 4 to 5 Skull Dragon attacks in the first place. So they're able to swap with each other and poke, 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 basically. Big poke stuff. Ballerina is basically if you don't have any CB and you can't really countercharge, or it could be a finishing stride, but basically when your opponent's Guardian is placed, discard 1 grade 1 or less and retire that Guardian. So it really forces cards out of their hand, but you're also sacrificing your cards in hand too. So be wary of that too. And then lastly, Twilight Night Rose, basically counterblast 1, and then basically call up to the number of cards in your G zone plus 1 to Rearguard Circle, and if you call 3 or more, it gets plus crit. And then any Night Rises in the drop zone, you can choose any number of cards on your field, and they get plus 5 for each Night Rose. So since we do play 1 copy of Night Rose, that actually can come up. Not big, but it can come up. So yeah. So this is the G zone. But ultimately, you end up with Bat Bounty, Big Obadiah, and maybe Megiddo. Everything else is kind of like situational and doesn't come up as often. So yeah. Lastly, the G Guardians. 2 Negronora, 2 Negro Mode, and 1 Rectum. Negronora is an awesome G Guard, especially for Granblue. It's the GB1 G Guard flip 1, so you basically Soul Blast 1 and do that. Choose 2 cards from your drop zone with different grades and call them to the Guardian Circle. So you typically would call your heal triggers and any grade 1 with a big shield, and you become a big fat shield. So it could be a 1 card guard for most attacks too, especially Vanguard attacks too. Negro is very similar, but you can use it right away. So Blast 1, for every 5 cards in the drop zone, it gets +5, and it does up to 15. So you can get additional 15k basically as a maximum, becoming a 30k shield basically. And so this you can use right away, and then sometimes you may want to preserve flipping, or you want to flip more, so you can flip the other one. And then Rectum is the utility one, so basically when it's on Guardian Circle, discard 1, draw 1. That's all it really is. So it helps your hand filter at that point. So yeah. So like I was mentioning with the Pseudo Megiddo Turn, I'm just going to demonstrate how it looks like visually so you guys can get a chance to see. So let's say you broke ride or you use Negrobone to basically call the Skull Dragon Sun to fuel. And at the same time, if you have a Brutal Shade, your Limit Break is enabled, even though you have 3 damage or less. So that's really essential. So don't forget about that. And so your main phase setup can easily look like this. It doesn't have to be super fancy or anything like this, but this is something that I just kind of came up on the spot. So basically, Skull Dragon number 1 pops itself and attacks. This attacks and pops. So now you're left with this. And so any drive checks that you have, you can put on boosters. And they could be behind the Vanguard or rearguards. In this case, again, since I did the deck profile, it's stacked. And then, of course, you can discard these 3, kind of blast 1. And then, trying to do too many things at once. You break ride with the Skull Dragon. I think I have a 3rd one somewhere. There it is. If you have a 3rd one, then you're going to do this. Do the break ride skill. Gets +10k, and you can call the 2 Skull Dragons that just died. So there we go. And boom, you broke ride. You got 2 rearguards again, Skull Dragons again. And then because, let's say this is really the only number of attacks you have left, you can do that. Do a twin drive, and then distribute triggers at that point. And then, of course, you can attack and boost for bigger columns. This dies. And then the same thing, this dies. So that's how it looks like. Very simple, very cool, honestly. If you want to extend, so let's say when you break ride, instead of doing the that, you can do basically Night Rose. So if you break ride with Night Rose, then you could call the 2 Skull Dragons. At that point, you only need 2. And though basically you can attack, retire, attack, retire. Then on attack, skill, Counter Blast 1, and call off 2 cards. So here's the other tip. If you have another Counter Blast and you want to extend more, you can call that and a column bar. Where's the column bar? There. You can call a Skull Dragon and a column bar behind Vanguard. Not behind Vanguard, behind that unit. And so then you use the column bar skill, mill something, and call the 2nd Skull Dragon that way. So you get to get 2 additional Skull Dragons at that point, with basically each Skull Dragon equating another Counter Blast at that point. So then any drive checks, right, distribute all the column bars. And then, of course, it gets 10k, so it's a 32k because it broke ride, and then its own skill, so it's 32k. And then, boom, the rearguards attack, they pop themselves. Voila. You could also further extend if you have a 4th Counter Blast at that point. Instead of doing that, you might want to do the Night Storm first, basically. And then when you do your boom, boom, and then this brings back, this can call basically another Skull Dragon. So that really just kind of extends more pokes, but I feel like generally that play where you can just put it behind and then do this is pretty solid at that point. So you really don't need to break ride. During your ride phase, you can use Negrobone to revive things for you, and then just go ballistic with the battle phase. And if you do it right, you basically end up with 6 Skull Dragon attacks, 2 Vanguard attacks, for the cost of 3 Counter Blasts. And if you play your cards right, especially with cards like Navigator, you can do this at first stride, and if your opponent's not ready for that, it's really hard for them to guard Skull Dragon's attack, especially after a certain threshold. So even if they get a trigger during the damage check, they're only going to be maybe 22k or 23k, and the Skull Dragons can easily get to 30, 40, 50, 60, and so on. at that point. So very solid, very cool. So yeah. And that's the deck profile, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the deck profile. Honestly, it's a very fun deck. It could be very explosive, as you can see. Honestly, play, test it, tweak it. There's some ratios that I might tweak myself in the future too. Maybe bumping up Navigator to 4 and then dropping something as a grade 3 count, or maybe something in the grade 1s that isn't really as helpful. You know, things like that. Feel free to tweak out. Let me know in the comments if you have anything to share, some combos that maybe I didn't mention, or maybe you guys newly discovered. And honestly, if you guys love the Granblue content that I put on this channel, feel free to go to roguewiththesevenseas.wordpress.com. That's actually the Granblue blog that I've made since, I think, March, April now. It's been a couple months. It's funny how time flies. But point is, you can go on there. There's loads of Granblue content, especially with all the reviews like Night Rose over here, for example, and Columbar. It's a good source of value, basically, if you are interested in Granblue, even for just interest or competitive, you know, maybe learning against how to play against it. Because one of the important things, if you want to learn how to beat something, you can learn how it functions. So you know its strengths and its weaknesses, and you know how to beat that deck as well. And of course, I point out to some of the people like Solon Vanguard, Ian, Evan, and so many other people, Nexus at Night. So just there's a number of sources that provide Granblue content. And so if you guys haven't been checked out there, go ahead. I'll put the link in the description as well, so you guys can just click it and check it out. Again, comment down below, like, share, and subscribe. See ya, amigos. Bye.